So, here we are at last, a video where I can talk about multiple different games at once. And what's my motivation for this one? Oh. Top 10 unique levels. Sure, that's never been done before. Hello everyone, I am Tessellating Hexagons, and you know, it's kind of funny. When I first set up my Patreon page, the way I worded it kind of implied that I'd only be doing top 10s for gaming content and not Eurovision stuff, even though honestly that was never my intention, it was just poor wording on my part. Regardless, we're several months deep into these videos now, and I've only done one top 10 so far, and that was on a Eurovision related subject. Well, here's my attempt to finally rectify that. So, allow me to elaborate on the title that I've chosen to go with for this list. Video games, right? Gotta love them. They're so full of, game and, content. And some games like to section off their content into levels in some way or another. Yeah, definitions tend to vary as to what qualifies as a level, so I may have to play that fast and loose with this list, but the long and short of it is this. I shall be counting down my top 10 favourite unique levels in gaming. After all, while environment and aesthetics aren't always the be-all and end-all of how good a level can be, they can sometimes determine exactly what you can expect from the level. Or, failing that, they can at least set some kind of atmosphere or just plain old leave an impression. It doesn't necessarily make the whole game good just by being unique, but at least these sorts of ideas tend to be memorable. You know, more so than seeing the 10,000th iteration of Green Hill Zone anyway. But before I run away with myself listing off all the levels that meet these criteria, I should spell out a couple of rules that govern how I think this list should be shaped. First of all, I'm bringing out that old chestnut of one representative per franchise. Like I said, it's never been done before on the internet. That should be relatively self-explanatory, just no more than one representative per game series in this list. Standard fare for a gaming countdown, you get the idea. Secondly, I'm defining a level in this case as any self-contained area in a game that fills the role of a key story beat. So in some cases that might be a platforming stage, in others it might be a dungeon, in others still it might represent the setting for a whole chapter. It's a bit of a nebulous concept, I'll freely concede, so I am having to be a bit flexible here. But hey, that's what I'm known for, here's my leg. And thirdly, most importantly, it has to have some aspect about it that I deem to be unique. Obviously, it wouldn't be on this list at all if I didn't think it had something like that, but it has to be something noteworthy. Not just, ooh, it's a pleasant greenish hill-like structure, but at night time. Oh, and a little bonus extra rule, they all have to be from games that I've played firsthand. Not Let's Played necessarily, just games that I have played for myself at some point. So, with that in mind, and that my opinion is going to be a play throughout, obviously, because of course it is, let's get the countdown started. Number 10. I would say that we're starting somewhere relatively tame, but when it comes to my tastes crossed with levels that I deem to be unique, that's hardly a fitting descriptor. So to kick off the list, let's take a trip back to 1995, to the adventures of Ristar. Ristar, I've heard some people say, I call it Ristar, and more specifically, the time that he spends on Planet Sonata. I may be cheating just a little with this one, in that, in a way, I want to include both levels 4.1 and 4.2, but if I have to just pick one, then I'd go with 4.1. Now, one of the easiest ways to my heart is to make a level themed around the concept of music, and even now in 2017 there are surprisingly few of them if you were to make some kind of graph of the commonness of level tropes. I mean, what is there? Planet Sonata, the second world from Zool, Music Plant from Sonic Advance 2, and like one stage from Kirby's Epic Yarn? I'm almost ashamed that it's a free ticket into getting points for originality, but it's such a cool concept and with so much potential. Planet Sonata in particular takes the spot on the list here, though, because of just how much they pack into the level that plays with the theme. And it does indeed play with the theme. That is to say, in 4.1, the music starts off void, bland and generic. In fact, it's actually just the game's main menu theme. As you progress, you have to collect these little metronomes and deliver them through gauntlets and to these singer bird guys. And as you do that, more of the song gradually opens up until you deliver all the metronomes and are rewarded with the level's full theme. And it is very rewarding. Not to mention fitting for a music-themed level. And that's just the level's gimmick. Aesthetically, it's got plenty of colours that wouldn't look natural in most other level tropes. It makes great use of the expectations that it has to play with. That is, you know, musical instruments as platforms and traps and whatnot. and they crank that up even further in level 4 too, which for whatever reason I remember as being a surprising spike in difficulty. But it has a totally different atmosphere, darker colours, bright lights, just generally more of a party kind of vibe. They really didn't leave any stone unturned with this music level, and that deserves a standing ovation.
Number 9.
At this point in time, you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who had the gaming childhood I had, who makes gaming content on YouTube, who doesn't agree that the Banjo-Kazooie series was an excellent franchise, even if things did start to go a bit off-kilter towards the end. But that said, to an extent, most of the levels were fairly standard collectathon fare. You've got grassy areas, beaches, snow places, a haunted house, a desert or two, something a bit more industrial here and there. And then, as the grand finale of the second game, you've got the cutting room floor of every wacky idea they couldn't fit into the rest of the game. What? Of course, I can only be talking about Cloud Cuckoo Land from Banjo-Tooie, and well, how else could one describe this level? Well, every other level is accessed by relatively sensible means, you know, going through a doorway of some description mostly. Cloud Cuckoo Land makes itself available by way of a bubble elevator appearing out of fresh nowhere to take our doubtless perplexed protagonists up to where else are the clouds, to a series of interconnected islands with a bizarre medley of unrelated themes, all connected to a central cavern. And to cap it all off, the bee transformation makes its triumphant return from the first game, now upgraded with controls that make it a much more viable way of traversing the islands. There is no single theme to this world, and yet it works so well. From the constantly respawning enemies in the central cavern that pop out of the ground with an old-fashioned cha-ching kind of noise, to the little themed islands, a castle made of jelly, a giant wedge of cheese with a spiky onion or two floating around on the inside as platforms, a huge bin, and an obligatory pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It's madness. Oh, and credit to the designer's sense of humour as well. You can only stay inside the aforementioned wedge of cheese for as long as your air meter, yes, your air meter, as in the meter usually only reserved for underwater segments, remains full. Stinky cheese joke. Well played. And what the hell other kind of level can you say that about, am I right? Number 8. Okay, alright, and here we go. What's this, you ask? Oh, I'm just raising the bar again after the weirdness we just witnessed. And in fact, this next level does come to us from a much classier, much more serious game, from very much the other side of the world from Rare's offices. From the world of Nippon, from the sequel It Is Okamiden, let's talk, ever so briefly, about the 5-story pagoda. I admit, out of everything on this list, Okamiden is the one that I've played the least recently, that's least-recently. Everything else I've played much closer to now than this, so my memories are a little unclear on this one, but that just goes to show, this level deserves recognition because it stuck with me so relatively vividly. Now, make no mistake, both Okami and Okamiden are full of unique, beautifully realised concepts, and choosing just one isn't easy. I mean, there's an entire dungeon set in what I think is a kabuki theatre. There's a labyrinth of technology from the moon, there's the inside of a dragon with terrible indigestion if I'm remembering rightly, and yet I've gone with a wet tower. I ought to explain, shouldn't I? It's a water level. There, I said it. But it's a water level done oh so very right, since it takes more than a moment to properly register that it's meant to be a water level. And bearing in mind the dungeon is located in a completely flooded forest, like literally the pagoda itself is submerged up to its roof in water, that's especially impressive. But its subtle incorporation of both traditional Japanese architecture and water puzzles, particularly making use of Chibi Teresa's partner at the time, Nanami the mermaid, and her hair, which serves as an infinite water source for some reason, makes it much more a sublime experience than one has any right to expect going into it. Again, bearing in mind it's a water level. Plus, it's where Chibi is introduced to the child of Noragami, and if you don't think the prospect of a moist child snake god who lives in a tiny pot is adorable, you're probably just not familiar with the context.
Number 7.
Well, I've already made the connection about what to expect from my gaming tastes off the back of my gaming childhood, and where Banjo-Kazooie receives praise as a franchise, Paper Mario is seldom far behind. Funnily enough, and far be it for me to meander off on a tangent here, but I would like to give a quick shout out to my father, because, the legend that he is, he managed to acquire me a physical copy of the game for my birthday a good 10 or so years ago, where it was really difficult to get hold of before we as a family fully understood what Nintendo's Virtual Console stuff was all about. So I hold the game especially dearly, and that's all well and good, but it doesn't tell us much about which level, or area in this case, that I've chosen for this list. Perhaps predictably, I've gone with Chapter 4, Shy Guy's Toy Box. Why? Well, it's right there in the name. It's a large, sprawling dungeon full of character, set inside a magic toy box. Only in a Mario RPG, I swear. There's quite a bit of appeal to be had here, though. Of course, there's the fun, bouncy aesthetic of everything being made of toys being played against the imagery of the Shy Guys as a species in the Mario world. It's just implied that this is how they live. This is their world. This is just how they be. And good for them. This is another case where the design team deserve major credit for just how much creative stuff they managed to do with such a relatively simple idea. For one, the idea of putting a toy train into the toy box as opposed to just bringing it in your inventory, turning it into a life-size train to carry you from point A to point B, genius. And that's just scratching the surface. They did good here. There's so much stuff going on. Well done. Also, I swear there is a section in the music there that reminds me of the song Virginia Plain by Roxy Music. Something about flying down to Rio, as I recall.
Number 6.
Alright, let's go off the deep end for a hot minute here. I don't want to believe that this is only so high in the list because I've been playing it recently, and in fact, as of the time of recording this, I only just finished this part of the game last week and have yet to carry on since then. But before I get properly started here, for the only time in this video, spoiler warning, legitimately. I'm not going to mention any characters by name, but there may be some audio spoilers regarding minor plot elements, and a fair few visual spoilers coming up for Danganronpa 2. So, if you want to give that the swerve, then skip to that timestamp there, and I'll give you a moment to do that, and anyone left still afraid of spoilers? Too bad, here we go. This might be something of a nebulous entry, but I'm putting in another entire Chapter 4 onto this list. In this case, I want to talk about the entirety of the Jabberwock Island Funhouse. Now, I won't go into the specifics of how it's arranged, because that's actually a huge part of the mystery element in that chapter, but in a way, that's actually a really big part of why it's on the list here. It's a funhouse. Its architecture is supposed to be deliberately confusing. And in that regard, they knocked it out of the park here. Pun only half intended. Honestly, the main thing that convinced me to mention this here is the fact that it consists of two distinct houses, both themed after fruit! Specifically, strawberries and grapes. And there's just something so off about being trapped in a bizarro funhouse that makes no geographical sense, doomed to starve to death until or unless one of your friends kills another one of your friends that might be you, while the walls, floor and ceiling are some sort of trippy, fruity screensaver. It's meant to perplex, and it does its job enviably. Great job there.
Number 5.
Okay, quick show of hands, does anyone here not think that Sonic Mania was all around a great game? Oh, of course! There's always one, isn't there? Some people just will not be pleased, will they? Anyway, Sonic Mania had a lot of great ideas for levels, even if most of them were recycled from previous games, and in more than just name as well, bringing back level gimmicks and concepts from basically every 2D Sonic game apart from Rush Adventure, and even then, that might have just slipped under the radar in my case. But I need to give credit where it's due to one of Mania's original unique levels, the hugely original Press Garden Zone, and dear oh dear does it get a lot of things so offensively right. I managed to stay relatively spoiler-free during the run-up to Mania's release, but then again, I hadn't been following it all that closely to begin with, so running headlong into Press Garden completely blindsided me. The music, for one, bouncy pogo pop, and including a printing press as a musical instrument, get out of town! It stuck with me from the get-go. Fun fact though, it actually took me a good minute or two to realise what the fresh hell Press Garden was actually even meant to be, in that, well, I understood the garden part, but it had to be spelled out for me, that, again, pun slightly intended, before I properly understood that it meant press as in printing press. I may have briefly thought that it was just a really quirky vineyard. And then there's Act 2. I think I'm the only person I know who prefers Act 1's overall package, but Act 2, heavily inspired by Shinobi, really does leave an impression. I was talking to a friend of mine while I played for the first time, and I mentioned how Press Garden had surprised me in the best possible way. His response was, "Oh yeah, it's Eggman's winter-haunted printing press, obviously." My response as I finished beating the mid-boss was, "Winter? What? Oh." and what a beautiful second half Act 2 is. Perhaps it's just my lingering love of launch bass from Sonic 3, but Act 1 still remains my favourite of the two. I'm just contrary like that, it seems.
Number 4.
And now, let's take a sudden, sharp swerve back into the territory of the relatively obscure. Only relatively, mind you. In fact, let's do what I did in my second year of university and dive unceremoniously and without warning into the media dimension. More specifically, to the worlds of Toon TV from Gex 3D Enter the Gecko. This is another kind of cheaty entry in the list because it's actually 2 levels separated by a fair bit of game in between, but they both have so much merit to speak of and they're both hugely memorable. Toon TV is another one of those fever dream kinds of levels. In this case, they serve as homage to the slapstick comedy cartoons of old, and either they didn't miss a beat when designing these levels, or they were doing some big drugs. Or both. It's a Gex game, I'll believe anything at this point. Standout moments in my memory include the entire Storm the Castle mission from the second stage for how little sense it makes and how fun it is as a consequence, and the world's unashamed pastichery of Looney Tunes' old gag of duck season versus rabbit season. Quite how they got away with it, I don't know, but I think I speak for an entire cult following when I say I'm heartily glad they found a way. Now, if only they could find a way to bring Gex back into the modern market. We can dream. And speaking of...
Number 3.
I'll freely admit, it would be a crime against all things game design if there weren't at least one entry on this list from a game all about dreams. So let's go as dreamlike as they come and cherry pick only the most creative and unique from the cast of, well, creative unique weirdness put forth by the 2 Knights games. While there is a lot to work with here, and I did very nearly pick a different level entirely from one of the games for this spot on the list, I'm going to go with Soft Museum from the first game, Nights into Dreams. As a child, this level freaked me out big time styly, and I honestly could not tell you why. It didn't scare me. As a child, and even now, I don't scare easily. But there was something about this perfectly natural, almost academic-looking landscape caving in and bouncing around underfoot that severely threw me into a profound mental blue screen of death. And for the purposes of this list, that's actually a really good sign. For such a curious concept, it's impressive that it's all right there in the name. Soft Museum. It's a soft museum. It's a museum / art gallery / sculpture park, but everything's made of foam, bouncy castle stuff, air mattresses, etc. And for good measure, they threw some mirror shenanigans in there too, just because they could. Quite how this idea got pitched in the first place, I would rather not find out. Just, don't get me started on the local boss, because fighting it is absolute garbage! I mean, sure, the music is sassy and cool, but the fight itself is just... Ugh! With my blessing, Jackal can just go and eat a big bag of
Number 2.
Speaking of dreams, well, this is a countdown by me, and a certain black and white ball of adorable dream fuzz has yet to make his appearance. You would have thought that my favourite level of all time from my favourite game of all time would somehow mysteriously find its way into being shoehorned into the number 1 spot on the list, but no. At number 2, I can't not talk about the Maze of Memories from Clonua 2 Lunatia's Veil. Sweet, frumpled giblets, this level is a masterpiece. The music is a thing of beauty unto itself, and I could easily rant about that all day, and how its title is a reference to another game for the Wonder Swan, but time and a place. The Maze of Memories, as the name implies, is a huge art museum of sorts in the mountainous kingdom of indecision, Mirror Mirror, but instead of paintings and sculptures, it's filled with memories. I mean, sure, they take the form of moving paintings and moving sculptures, but shut up, it's art. Anyway, I just love the aesthetic here, with its combination of clean, futuristic hallways, kaleidoscopic colour palettes, and kind of Zodiac-esque motifs in some places. Between that and its gimmicks of reversing gravity, but like in an artsy sort of way, and its final puzzle with the revolving walkway, the Maze of Memories left a huge impression on me the first time I played it, and I've been madly in love ever since, and that's saying nothing of what happens in the story shortly thereafter. It's always the first place I go to mentally when making my case for why Lunatia's Veil is my favourite game of all time, but after a certain point, words don't really do it justice, so if you can get the game for yourself, then just go and play it. And if not, well, I did a Let's Play of it, so you could always go and watch that. That was relatively recent. But having said that, it didn't take the number 1 spot on this list. So one has to ask, what did?
And number 1.
I mentioned earlier that Of all the games featured on this list, Okamiden was the one that I've gone the longest without playing. Admittedly, the winner of this list hails from another game that I've not touched in quite a while, but it was so full of unique level ideas across the board that I had to give it credit where it was due on this list. I'm talking, of course, about Tim Schafer's magnum opus, Psychonauts. And for those who are familiar with the game, this should immediately set your brains into overdrive trying to figure out which level I picked for this list. Could it be the one that takes place entirely on a theatre stage? The one made entirely of black velvet paintings? The one that takes place inside Serhat's brain, complete with a secret hidden box full of nightmare fuel, because why the hell not? Surprisingly, no. At first glance, the Milkman conspiracy might be so much more mundane than all of those, but trust me, it's a creative level. Set inside the mind of paranoid night watchman Boyd Cooper, it looks like a relatively normal chunk of idealistic suburban America, but step outside and, well, to say it goes off the deep end just at the mention of the streets twisting and defying gravity would be selling the whole thing a bit short. Indeed, the whole chapter is a maelstrom of faceless government agents arguing over pie fillings, decidedly evil Girl Scout, rainbow squirts, and ominous eyes watching around every corner. Overall, it's an affectionate pastiche of all the stereotypes associated with the, stereotypical mind of an obsessive conspiracy theorist. And in a game already full of brilliant ideas, this one really does take the cake for showing just what the design team could do with even the most plain-sounding of starting points. Oh, and watch out for the angry demon void that pops up out of nowhere here and there. They were supposed to at least explain that at some point. Oh well. And that's the list. I'm sure with careful over-analysis you could extrapolate a thing or two from this to learn about what makes a unique level good or what makes a good level unique, but I admit I just put this list together because it sounded like a fun idea, and I think levels like these do deserve recognition. So, on that note, let me know what you think. What are some of your favourite levels that set themselves apart from the rest through creativity, originality, or whatever else they might use in pursuit of uniqueness? I'm genuinely interested, sincerely, especially since I restricted myself to only games that I've played for this list. And while you have a little think about that, I shall thank you quite profoundly for watching this video, and to thank my supporters over on patreon.com/TessHex even more profoundly still. If it weren't for their support, these videos literally wouldn't be happening at all, so if you want to help keep this good thing going, you're more than quite welcome to join the campaign. There are perks and other such rewards in it for you, of course, not least being able to view these videos a whole month in advance, meaning there are 2 new videos you could go and watch right now if you're watching this on YouTube. You know, just a thought, just throwing it out there. I'm not going to say anything. For now though, as always, I have been and will continue to be Tessellating Hexagons, and I shall talk at your lovely self again when next you want me to. So, see you then.